Hi, everybody. Welcome to our second video lecture. Again, this is something I thought would work better if I kind of walk you through the PowerPoint slides that I'm going to show you in a few minutes. Purpose of what I want to do today is to talk a bit about media theory, which, may sound maybe intimidating or not that exciting, but as we look at news stories, as we look at coverage of the presidential election, I want you to keep these things in mind because we hear a lot of talk today. People obviously are critical of the media. A lot of that criticism is valid, but a lot of that criticism is opinion. And it's, people say there's fake news, news is biased, and there's probably some truth to all those. But I think the real problems or issues with the media go a lot deeper than that. And that's what I want to show you a bit of today. And I'm going to share a couple more theories with you next week. And we'll use these as we study things. Because as I said, I want people to look at things and have constructive dialogue at them, have really intelligent conversations. That's one of the things that I enjoyed about being a PhD student, that it gave me an opportunity to sit in a classroom for 2 or 3 hours a week, because it was a once a week class with some really smart people and have a smart, intelligent discussions. And I've used that format in my classes at Oxford, which really lend themselves to that format. And to a certain degree, I try to do it here at Bonaventure, especially with these type of classes. So let me share the screen, and I'm going to walk you through some media theory, which actually starts with some work I did in my doctoral dissertation. So, okay. So this statement, a healthy media is a critical component of a healthy democracy, is kind of key to a lot of the work I've done. It's going to be something that's going to underlie our approach to elections here, that the weaker that media organizations, the media industry is, the weaker democracy is. And we're going to see that play out, or see some examples of that throughout the semester. But I just wanted to, I'm not going to obviously go through my whole doctoral dissertation, but what I was looking at was, this is jumping ahead here. Okay. What I was looking at was the difference in New Jersey's 2005 and 2009 gubernatorial elections, and how the media was covering them, what the different role was. And one of the reasons I picked those two elections was what had happened in the 4 years between them. You can see here, 2005, YouTube was just starting. Most of the people who were on Facebook were students. Twitter didn't even exist. And by 2009, pretty much the whole media campaign world had been turned on its head. All three of these things were essential to campaigns, they're essential to journalism. And here we are 10 plus years later, and they're even a greater part of our role. And in my dissertation, I did a lot of research. I talked with people, I read a lot. And what I came up with for my findings for what had changed in those 4 years was the quality of coverage had declined. It just wasn't as good in 2009 as it was in 2005. And these were trends that I identified back then, and I think most of them, unfortunately, have continued up until today. The reporting was more shallow. It wasn't in-depth. It really didn't get into what the issues were. There was more focus on personalities than on the issues, and I think we definitely see that today as we see what gets written about with the president, with the presidential race. Think about how much have you actually heard about where the president stands on certain issues, where Joe Biden says versus some of these kind of things that are mostly designed to get web page clicks. The end result was it left voters less informed, which ties into the article we read last week that about low information voters. Okay, reasons this happened that I've discovered and came out through the interviews were two. It was partially economic. There had been a big economic crash in 2008 that hurt the economy overall, but the media industry was hurt even greater. And the rise of the internet, it just changed the way news was reported. It changed the way people were getting their information. So in terms of the economy, for news organizations, it reduced their personnel, it reduced their resources. So they didn't have as much at their hands to do the type of reporting that they used to. The staff was younger, less experienced, because a lot of older reporters took buyouts. They were making more money. It was much easier or much more economical for a news organization to hire 2, 3 people who were starting out at lower salaries than keep people on staff who had been there for years and were making more. And that's nothing against young people. I mean, one thing about journalism and about politics is you can have a real big impact when you're young, but there's no substitute for that institutional knowledge. You know, people had been there for years, who knew how things worked, who kind of knew the backstories to everything. And as a result, media organizations weren't able to provide the in-depth reporting that would really give voters what they needed to make informed in decisions at the ballot box. In terms of the internet, because while this economic downturn was happening, at the same time, media was having more pressure put on it. Journalists had to do more. They had to do more frequent updates with stories. When I was a reporter, you'd go out, you'd cover a story, you'd write it, be in the paper the next day. Now you go out and cover a story. 2 hours later, you're writing an update. An hour after that, you're getting a response. So the story lives for a while. I mean, it's, you know, you're constantly updating it. You don't want old information on your webpage. There was a need to attract viewers. With the internet, became very easy to measure traffic. And unfortunately, the stories that attract viewers are not usually the ones that are in-depth stories on important issues. So there was a lot of clickbait, you know, stories that were designed primarily to get people to a web page. And, you know, that was unfortunate because now instead of just thinking about what's newsworthy, what's most important, you know, you're thinking about which type of story is going to get more readers. Okay? More responsibilities for journalists. Again, when I was a reporter, I was a writer. I'd cover a story, I'd write it, that was it. Now, if you're a journalist, and we teach this with our students, you have to be multi-talented. You have to write a story, you have to shoot video, you have to blog about it, you have to get it out on social media. So it's a lot more responsibilities. And all of these new things, news organization had to do with less people, with less resources. So combined, that kind of contributed to overall a downturn in the quality of journalism, which, as I said, unfortunately, there are trends that have continued. Okay? First media theory I'm going to introduce you to, and it's the only one I'm going to talk about today, is something called a propaganda model. It's a book called Manufacturing Consent by Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky. And as I've mentioned in some of the comments on Moodle, some of the postings, propaganda model talks about 5 filters that news goes through before it reaches the public. And I first read this when I started my doctoral program. And I started my doctoral program later in life. And I was in class with a lot of people who were younger, who didn't have the professional experience I had. And I'm not complaining. It was a good mix. I learned from them. They learned from me. But as my professor explained the 5 filters, they really hit home because I could almost think about, in my own experience, how they actually played into the ultimate product that got printed in the newspaper back then. Now that, you know, gets printed or gets posted online or on social media. So the filters are, and you know, all these slides will be on Moodle. You can, you know, take your time and look at them later. Media consolidation, the drive for profit. We touched on that a bit in some of our earlier work. Advertising, what's known as a symbiotic relationship between media and government. Flack, which I'll explain when we get to it, and fear. So I'm going to go through them one by one, give you some examples. It's one of the reasons I wanted to do this via video. It's will mean a lot more to you than just, you know, posting a bunch of slides on Moodle and telling you to look through them. So the first one, and these are their wordings: size, ownership, and profit orientation filters of the mass media. This is basically what we started out with. That's why I had you look at the 6 corporations that own so many different media outlets. It's media concentration and how that affects the quality of news. And I explained that, and I had you read this article I wrote about Toy Story and how if you're at Disney, it makes more sense from a corporate standpoint to invest your money in something like Toy Story, which is going to continue making money for years and years, as opposed to ABC News, which is going to make a little bit of money, but you have to go out and create a new product every night. This is a shot from my office. I am a big Toy Story fan, as you can see. If we ever get back to the point where we're visiting, come by and I'll share this with you. I have a Toy Story section, I have a Springsteen section, I have Met stuff all over, but getting a little bit off track, but I just wanted to show you, there's actually a picture of me here with Buzz Lightyear. My kids know I was a big Toy Story fan, so when we were at Disney, they made me get in line, have my picture taken. I was in line with a bunch of, 10-year-olds, but my daughters insisted you have to take that. So that's my Buzz Lightyear picture. But back to why we're talking about Toy Story. Again, here's an example of some of the revenue that Toy Story's brought in the 25 plus years since the original one came out. So, the main point, and it was in the op-ed article I wrote, was these large corporations own businesses that are, some are media organizations, but some are not. And the money-making ones are not the media ones. So when it comes time to decide where you're going to invest the bulk of your money, it generally doesn't go into the news operation. And again, that translates into a decline in the quality of journalism. The other part about media concentration, which we didn't mention, was the news tends to be homogenized. And by that, I mean people in different parts of the country, and this is an example of different parts of the state in New Jersey, because of media concentration, get a general news story, not a story that's really attuned to their own interest. This is a list of newspapers in New Jersey. Most of them, you can see, are owned by two chains, Gannett and Advance Media. Might not be entirely up to date. I haven't revisited this in a while, but serves the purpose to make my point. At one point, New Jersey had maybe about 20 daily newspapers. They were all independently owned by families, so that they each did their own stories. An example I like to use is when the state of New Jersey, when the governor proposes the state budget, which usually happens in March, Gannett, since they own all these papers, figures, why should I have 7 or 8 different State House reporters in Trenton? Why should I pay them money to more or less cover the same stories? So because of media consolidation, they'll get one State House reporter, or maybe a State House bureau, but less people to cover the state. So when the state budget comes out, there'll be a pretty good budget story. It'll be general. It'll be the state budget is X billion dollars. It's this much more than last year. Here's 4 or 5 highlights. And it'll run in all these papers. Back when there wasn't consolidation, when all these papers were owned by different organizations, the stories would be more specific to readers. So let's say you live down the Jersey Shore and you read the Asbury Park Press. You get the state budget. It might talk about how much money is in there for shore protection. Let's say you read the Home News Tribune, which is in East Brunswick, New Jersey, right by Rutgers. Budget story probably would talk a bit about what's in it for higher education. If you lived in the Camden area and read the Courier Post, Camden is a really tough city. That story might tell you how much money is in there for urban renewal. So in the days before consolidation, budget would come out, you'd get a story, it would give you the overall specifics, but it would tell you how it's going to impact your daily life and things like that. Now you get one story. That's why I said the story is homogenized. So that's another kind of unfortunate result of media consolidation.